The Whispering Woods. Sarah had always been curious about the old forest at the edge of town. The Whispering Woods, the locals called it. They said you could hear voices there, soft murmurs, as if the trees were alive and talking. But no one ever went in. Not since the strange disappearances decades ago. Sarah was new to town, and despite the warnings, she couldn't resist the mystery. One Saturday evening, armed with a flashlight, a backpack, and her phone, she decided to explore. The sun was setting as she stepped into the forest. The air was cooler here, the towering trees blocking out most of the fading light. Leaves crunched beneath her feet as she followed a narrow dirt path winding deeper into the woods. At first, everything seemed normal. Birds chirped, and the wind rustled the leaves. But then, the noises faded. The silence pressed against her ears, thick and unnatural. That's when she heard it, a faint whisper. It came from her left, barely audible. Sarah. She froze. Her name. She'd heard her name, but there was no one there. She shone her flashlight into the trees, the beam cutting through the shadows. Nothing. Hello, she called, her voice trembling. No response. Just the whispering, growing louder now. It sounded like multiple voices overlapping, like a crowd speaking in hushed tones. She couldn't make out the words, but it was coming from deeper in the forest. Against her better judgment, Sarah followed the sound. The path grew narrower, the trees closer together. The air smelled damp, like rotting wood. As she walked, she realized the whispers weren't random. They were repeating something, over and over. Turn back. Turn back. She stopped, her heart pounding. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her curiosity kept her rooted. Who's there? She asked again, her voice shaky. The whispers paused, and for a moment, the forest was silent. Then a single voice spoke, clear and close, as if someone was right behind her. You shouldn't have come. Sarah spun around, her flashlight darting through the darkness. Still nothing. Her breathing quickened, and she clutched the flashlight tightly. She decided to turn back. Whatever this was, it wasn't safe. But the path was gone. She stared in disbelief. The dirt trail she had been following had vanished, replaced by thick undergrowth. Panic set in as she turned in circles, searching for any sign of the way she'd come. The trees seemed closer now, their gnarled branches reaching toward her like skeletal fingers. No, 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 she muttered, her voice trembling. She tried to retrace her steps, but every direction looked the same. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. They no longer sounded like warnings. They sounded like laughter. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed her. She fumbled with it, hitting it against her palm, but it wouldn't turn back on. Her phone. She pulled it out, but there was no signal. The screen's dim light was the only thing keeping her from complete darkness. That's when she saw them. Eyes. Dozens of them, glowing faintly in the shadows. They blinked, watching her. She stumbled backward, her breath coming in short gasps. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices surrounding her. Leave, they hissed. You don't belong. I'm sorry, she stammered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean to. I'll go, I promise. The eyes moved closer, emerging from the shadows. They weren't animals. They were shapes, humanoid but wrong. Their limbs were too long, their movements jerky and unnatural. Their faces were pale and featureless, except for those glowing eyes. Sarah ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. Branches clawed at her arms and face as she pushed through the undergrowth. The whispers followed her, growing louder and angrier. She tripped and fell, scraping her knees on the rough ground. Her phone flew from her hand, landing a few feet away. Its screen cracked but still glowed faintly. She crawled toward it, but as she reached out, a pale hand grabbed her wrist. Sarah screamed, kicking and thrashing. The hand was cold and impossibly strong. Another hand grabbed her ankle, dragging her backward. She looked up and saw them. The figures, their eyeless faces inches from hers. They opened their mouths, and darkness poured out, swallowing her scream. Sarah woke up to sunlight filtering through the trees. She was lying on the forest floor, her clothes torn and dirty. Her flashlight and phone were gone. Dazed, she stumbled to her feet and looked around. The path was back, clear and visible, leading out of the woods. She didn't hesitate. She ran, not stopping until she was out of the forest and back in town. People stared as she burst onto the street, disheveled and wild-eyed. She tried to tell them what happened, but no one believed her. They said the Whispering Woods played tricks on people, made them imagine things. But Sarah knew what she'd seen, and she knew she'd been warned. That night, as she lay in bed, she heard it again. The whispers, soft and distant, but unmistakable. You shouldn't have come. And then, closer. We're coming for you. Sarah never slept again.